Chapter 7. The Witch. Cerberus arrived in Argent 2 weeks after his father's funeral. The tale of his escape from Palacaid was not at all as harrowing as that of his companions had been. The battle between the ghouls and the gargoyles had left both sides so battered that the prince's presence among them had gone unnoticed. His delay in reaching Argent was due to another matter altogether, one that foreboded controversy between the prince and his newly crowned brother. Ectheon had resolved to allow his brother time to mourn before inquiring about the mission to Palacaid, but Cerberus seemed more than eager to put his father's death behind him. Indeed, on the very evening he returned, he came to the new king with plans for yet another mission to capture Dyaxes. The topic did not sit well with Ectheon. "Have you learned nothing from your brush with death in Palacaid?" Ectheon asked angrily. "This all-consuming obsession of yours must come to an end. And it will, if you will just allow me the opportunity to finish things once and for all," Cerberus insisted. "I have heard this all before," the king said. "Each time you feel the villain is in your grasp, and each time he slips away. How weary you sound, describing my tireless efforts to bring our sister's murderer to justice," Cerberus said sharply. "Indeed, the very man who cut our father's life short." "I do not mean to belittle your crusade," Ectheon said. "My words may sound cutting, but they are not spoken out of anger. Rather, they are spoken out of fear. Fear that your endless pursuit of Dyaxes will soon make you a stranger to this kingdom, and to me in particular, or worse yet, that in seeking the death of another, you will find your own. I just lost father. I do not want to lose you as well." "You are not going to lose me," Cerberus assured his brother. "It seems to me that I almost did in Palacaid," the king pointed out. "That was a most unusual circumstance," Cerberus explained. "It will not happen again." Ectheon stared into his brother's eyes. "There is nothing that I can say that will stop you, is there?" Ectheon concluded. "I would prefer to have your approval in this matter, as in all things, brother," Cerberus said. "But you would act without it," Ectheon ventured. "Let us not have it come to that," Cerberus said. "Surely you must know that I am of no use to you here in this state of mind. I cannot be at peace while Dyaxes walks this earth." "Then I fear that this kingdom shall know no peace," Ectheon sighed. "You may do as you will. But Eadril and the other knights will not join you this time. Their place is here to serve in the defense of this kingdom." "Fair enough," Cerberus agreed. He then placed his hand on Ectheon's shoulder and said, "I am sorry if I have added to the weight of this burden so recently placed on your shoulders. It is my hope that when all is said and done, my actions will have added to the glory of your reign." "I will settle for your safe return," Ectheon said. Cerberus set off for Norsehold, the capital of the northern nation of Nordrius, the following day. The Nordrians were a fierce but civilized race of humans. They were considered allies of the elves, though it had not always been so. Of all the knights, only Errol accompanied Cerberus on his mission. Errol's decision greatly dismayed Ectheon, and the king tried his best to dissuade the young prince from going. But in the end, the king gave his consent for all the same reasons he suffered Cerberus to go. Joining the princes were 10 soldiers, hand-picked from Cerberus's division of the army. Next to the knights of the Elven Guard, they were considered among the best warriors in the kingdom. Cerberus bestowed upon them the name the Demon Hunters. After several days of riding through the blustery autumn wind, the warriors came to the city of Norsehold. The Nordrian capital was the focal point of activity in the vast northern plains, and on that particular evening, the city was more active than usual. Cerberus and the others soon found out why. A frenzied mob filled the streets. With flaming torches in their hands, the citizens of Norsehold poured into the center of the city. As the Teluvians rode through the confusion, Cerberus asked one of the angry Nordrians what was going on. "There is a sorceress in the town," the Nordrian replied. "The murderous witch has killed 3 people. Mauled them like an animal, she has. But we've got her now, and she's gonna burn." "A witch?" Errol gasped. "I have heard of witch hunts, but I have never seen one before. Well, the hunt is over, but now you'll get to see the bonfire we've prepared for her, the Nordrian said darkly. As the warriors followed the flow of the crowd into the city's main square, they bore witness to the ugly scene. In the center of the mob stood the accused witch, bound to a stake amid a pile of dried timbers. Cerberus recognized the doomed maiden. "Celacia," Cerberus gasped. "Is that the maiden you rescued from Palacade?" Errol asked. "Yes," Cerberus replied. "I needed to travel to Argion in great haste, so I left her here to wait for my return. We must save her before she succumbs to this barbarism." The Teluvian prince used his horse to force his way through the mob. The other warriors followed him to the center of the square. One of the torchbearers was just about to set the pile ablaze when Cerberus knocked the flaming stick from his hand with his sword. The prince's actions drew curses and scowls from the crowd. "What, in God's name, are you doing?" the angry torchbearer demanded. "I am preventing you from making a terrible mistake," the prince replied. "Who is in charge here?" "I am," answered a burly, red-bearded man as he came forward. "I am Holthar, the marshal of this city, and I am acting on the orders of King Logan himself. By what right do you challenge my authority?" "I am Prince Cerberus of Teluvia. The maiden you are about to execute is under my protection." "Under your protection?" The marshal scoffed. "She needs no protection. It is we who must be protected from her. The maid you so gallantly defend is a murderess, a vile servant of Satan. Now, step aside, lest you be branded her accomplice and share her fate." "You are making a terrible mistake," the prince insisted. "She is innocent. As innocent as Satan himself," Halthor retorted. Cerberus's attempt to reason with the marshal had failed. The time had come for him to act. With a mighty swing, he slashed open the throat of the red-bearded Nordrian. There was a brief pause in the action as the stunned crowd watched the marshal's body fall to the ground. "Errol," Cerberus shouted. "Untie her." Errol wasted no time in carrying out his brother's orders. He immediately jumped down from his horse and made his way through the pile of wood to free Celacia. Meanwhile, the realization of what was happening hit the Nordrians, and they began to close in on the small band of Teluvian warriors. "Hurry, Errol," Cerberus yelled as he slashed wildly to fend off the frenzied citizens of Nor's Hold. The demon hunters helped to defend Errol as he cut through the final cords that bound Celacia to the stake. Having freed the maiden, Errol took her hand and led her out of the pyre. Cerberus rode up and pulled Celacia up onto his horse. The maiden clung tightly around the prince's waist as he spurred the mighty steed on in pursuit of the demon hunters, who were already driving a path through the angry crowd. The Teluvians managed to break loose from the violent mob and immediately rode toward the gates of the city. The clanging of the city's bell put the gatekeepers on alert. Cerberus looked on in concern as the heavy iron-banded doors slowly drew closed to cut off their escape. He looked back and saw the torches of the enraged Nordrians flickering in the not-so-far distance. Their curses and condemnations drummed in his ears as he sped toward the only way out of the city. "Run like the wind, Aldrax," Cerberus whispered in the ear of his steed. The swift beast's nostrils flared as it galloped at a blazing rate toward the closing doors. Errol watched with worried eyes as he saw the gap between the doors growing smaller by the second. "We will never make it," he shouted ahead to his brother. "Yes, we will," Cerberus assured him. Errol looked on as the demon hunters and finally Cerberus narrowly passed through the shrinking opening. But alas, by the time Errol reached the gate, it was nearly closed. He pulled back on the reins, sending his horse rearing on its hind legs. His escape had been cut off. The heavy doors were slammed shut before him. The formidable gate and towering granite walls stood between him and his friends. To make matters worse, the angry citizens of Nor's Hold poured forth from the street behind him, seeking to put a brutal end to those accused of serving the devil. Errol stood alone to face their wrath. The young prince's eyes searched feverishly for a way out. Behind him was the charging horde of witch hunters. Before him were the tightly sealed doors of the city and the men who defended them. There was only one place for him to go, up. He jerked the reins and directed his horse to the only possible means of escape. "Climb, whirlwind, climb." He urged his steed as it charged up the steps leading to the rampart of the city's outer wall. The horse struggled with its footing, but managed to make it to the top in all the haste Errol could ask for. Upon reaching the rampart, the prince surveyed the area around him. On the ground outside the wall, on the other side of the moat, stood his friends. They had stopped their flight upon noticing Errol's absence. The ground inside the city was filled with the fiery glow of the torches held by the frenzied Nordrians. Meanwhile, the gate guards bolted up the steps in pursuit of the prince. With the city's guards fast on his heels, Errol rode Whirlwind at a swift gallop along the stone rampart. But there was only so much room to run. Ahead of the fleeing prince was a tower garrison. A stone wall with a single wooden door marked the end of the segment of the wall upon which Errol traveled. The prince looked behind him to check the progress of those pursuing him. Whirlwind's speed had put them reasonably ahead of the guards. Errol's eyes turned forward once again, and as they did, his blood ran cold. Rushing out of the tower ahead of him were a group of soldiers. He quickly pulled back on the reins, bringing Whirlwind to an abrupt stop. There was little choice but to turn around, which he wasted no time doing. He spurred Whirlwind on once more, only this time in the direction from which he had just come. Directly in his path were the guards he had been fleeing from only moments earlier. Charging after him were even more soldiers. The ground below him on his left was filled with torch-bearing Nordrians. Below him on the right, the reflection of the pale moonlight shimmered off the calm waters of the moat that encircled the city. Errol looked ahead with determined eyes as his collision with the approaching guards became all the more imminent. His mind was made up, his course of action set. The angry cries of the crowd below him filled his ears as the razor-sharp blades held by the guards danced ominously before his eyes. He said a prayer as he braced himself for what was about to happen. The guards readied their swords as the prince showed no sign of reducing his speed. They grasped their weapons with whitened knuckles in preparation for the collision that was only seconds away. They looked upon the prince with fiery eyes as he approached them. Errol returned their stares, but at the last moment, he clenched his eyes tightly shut. In a sudden motion, he jerked the reins to the right, guiding the horse over the parapet that bordered the top of the wall. The shocked gasps of the guards were drowned out by the frightful cries of the horse and its rider as they plummeted through the cool night air. Errol held on tightly to the trembling beast as he fearfully anticipated the coming impact. Though the fall only lasted a few seconds, in Errol's mind, it felt like an eternity. Then suddenly, the rush of the wind through his hair was replaced by a wave of cold water. Upon hitting the surface of the moat, Errol continued his descent. He sank deeply into the murky water until the muddy bottom finally put an end to his fall. Errol did not linger in his liquid surroundings for long. He immediately began swimming for the surface. The water was rather deep, and by the time he finally broke through to the open air, he was completely exhausted. With weary limbs, he dragged his drenched body from the lurid waters of the moat and collapsed on the moss-covered banks. In his fleeting moments of consciousness, he felt someone lifting him up. "Well done," Cerberus said as he rode up to his brother. "I feared you were lost, Daedrius. My brother has lost his steed. He will have to ride with you." Daedrius helped Errol onto his horse. "What now, my prince?" one of the demon hunters asked Cerberus. "To Argion," Cerberus responded. "The sooner we are out of Nordrian territory, the better." Actaeon was not at all pleased when he learned of Cerberus's exploits in Nordrius. "This madness of yours was bad enough when it was only you who was at risk," Actaeon said as he angrily paced the floor of the throne room. "But what happened in Nordrius could bring us to war." "You exaggerate, brother," Cerberus said wearily. "Do I?" Actaeon roared. "In their eyes, you have aligned us with a murderous witch. Do you even know who it was she was accused of killing? What if it was a member of their royal family?" "Salacia did not kill anyone," Cerberus said in a fiery tone. "I am thankful that I was there to save her from those backward fools." "How can you be so certain that she is not what they claim her to be?" Actaeon asked. "After all, you met her in Palaceid, a realm of great evil. She was lured there Just the same way that Errol was, Cerberus protested. She would have perished there if I had not rescued her. I do not know, Cerberus, Ectheon said. I have a bad feeling about this, about her. You do not even know her, Cerberus lashed out. And neither do you. Ectheon shot back. I know her well enough to say that I want her to be a part of my life, Cerberus said. In fact, I dare say I know her better than you knew Sarah when you were willing to die for her. Do not make this personal, Cerberus, Ectheon warned his brother. This is a matter of security. The chance meeting in Palisade, the accusations of witchcraft, it all makes me uneasy. Then come out and say it, brother, Cerberus shouted. Say that you want her gone. Is it enough for me to remove her from Argion, or would you have her leave Deluvia altogether? Perhaps I should take her back to Nordrius, or better yet, Palisade. Enough, Ectheon said firmly. If it is your desire, then she can stay. But she will be watched, Cerberus. On behalf of Celacia, I thank you for your hospitality, sire, Cerberus said as he gave a sarcastic bow. He then turned and walked out of the room, without saying another word, as Ectheon shook his head in frustration.